It always begins quietly, not with a scream, not with a storm, but with something far more subtle. The breath that doesn't finish, the silence after news you didn't want, the moment you realize that nothing is going to be the same again. A door closes. A number appears on a screen. A voice tells you they're not coming back. A diagnosis is spoken, or worse, they say nothing, and you understand everything by what's missing. This is the moment where philosophy must stop being a pastime and become your weapon, where quotations are useless unless they become muscle, where no book, no mentor, no plan, no God can lift your feet unless you choose to move. And in that space, between collapse and composure, you discover the real question Stoicism was always asking. What will you do when the world takes what it promised it would protect? It is here that most people fall, not because they are weak, but because they were never taught how to stand in fire without making it worse. But the Stoic was not trained in ease. He was trained for war, and not the war of armies or nations, but the daily war of soul against chaos, of reason against instinct, of dignity against despair. And the first rule is this: you do not run, you stand, even if trembling, even if confused. You stand, not because it feels good, but because it is the only position from which you can rebuild a life worth living. The collapse is not the end. In every Stoic's life, there comes a collapse. Marcus Aurelius lost children. Epictetus was born into slavery. Seneca was exiled, betrayed, and forced to die by his own hand. And yet, none of these men left behind volumes filled with bitterness. Why? Because they understood something most people never learn. Pain is inevitable, but weakness is a choice repeated daily. When the world collapses, whether it be through loss, illness, betrayal, or failure, you will be tempted to make it worse. You will reach for blame, for distraction, for self-pity. These are easy. They require no discipline. But what they cost is your strength. And Stoicism, if it teaches anything, teaches this: strength is not born in triumph. Strength is born in the exact moment when nothing makes sense, and you choose not to collapse into story, but to return to clarity. The pain is real, the chaos is real, but you remain, you breathe. You focus not on the mountain you cannot move, but on the stone you can carry. One thought, one sentence, one act of courage, however quiet, and from that point, the rebuilding begins. The first thing you must master: interpretation. Stoics never said that pain doesn't exist. They said it's not the pain that ruins you, it's the interpretation. Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. This is not a motivational quote. It is a spiritual operation. When hardship strikes, your first job is to cut through the noise. Your loved one is gone. You've been fired. You are ill. You've lost your home. They've lied to you. You failed. And the mind begins to spin. This is unfair. This is proof I'll never succeed. This means I am cursed. This ruins everything. Number the Stoic steps between reality and story, and kills the lie before it metastasizes. He says, this is what happened. Full stop. Now, what is within my control? He reclaims power not by denying pain, but by refusing to let it dictate his identity. You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to feel. But you are not allowed to surrender your ability to choose your next move. The interpretation is yours, and in that, so is the future. Stillness in the eye of the storm. When tragedy strikes, people look for chaos. They expect it. They seek leaders who speak fast, act fast, yell loud. The Stoic does the opposite. He becomes still. not as inaction, but as command. This stillness is not numbness. It is full awareness minus panic. Marcus Aurelius, ruling Rome during plagues, rebellions, and the deaths of his own children, practiced this daily. He reminded himself, if it's endurable, then endure it. If not, it ends. There is no dignity in flailing. There is no clarity in outrage. There is no power in screaming at fate. But in stillness, real stillness, you begin to hear something else. Beneath the fear, beneath the noise, you hear what is required. You remember what must not be lost. You see where the next foothold lies. The Stoic in crisis does not perform. He assesses, and by moving an inch calmly, he begins to build the bridge that others will later walk across. Despair is a lie, told by the moment. There is a particular lie that creeps in during your lowest hours. It whispers, "This will never change. This pain will last forever. This failure defines you. You will always be alone. You've missed your chance. Your strength was an illusion." These are not insights. These are symptoms of despair. And the Stoic, even in agony, calls them what they are: temporary distortions of a frightened mind. He does not make decisions while under the influence of them. He does not answer his phone in the middle of the night. He does not lash out when he feels worthless. He does not plan his future when his soul is bleeding. Instead, he waits. He lets the storm pass, not passively, but deliberately. And when clarity returns, he moves, not based on fear, but on form. The pain is the doorway. You are not being tested to prove how much you can lose. You are being shaped by what you can hold, what you can endure without poisoning yourself in the process. Pain is the chisel. And while you did not choose this moment, if you are to survive it, you must let it sculpt you. That is the Stoic path. Not escape, but transmutation. And if you walk it, quietly, firmly, day by day, you will emerge not untouched, but undefeated. Once the blow has landed, once the betrayal is done, the illness confirmed, the door closed. You are left not in silence, but in an aftershock. The world seems intact, but nothing feels trustworthy. You look at the same streets, the same faces, the same clock on the wall, but the you who once lived in that world is gone. Something was shattered. And now you face the question that no one else can answer for you. Who will rise from the ashes of this version that just died? This is where Stoicism no longer exists in theory. This is where it either saves you or vanishes as just another comfort you used to talk about in better times. And so the Stoic returns to the root, not the opinions of others, not the swirl of memory, but to the only place that remains stable when the storm has stripped you bare: virtue. It is the compass, the rope, the thread that leads you back to the man you were always meant to become. The pillars of rebuilding: wisdom, courage, justice, temperance. These are not words. These are not academic virtues to be memorized. These are the four walls of a temple you now must construct, brick by brick, through habit and hardship alike. First, wisdom. It begins with clarity, not intellectual brilliance, just the willingness to see what is without distortion. You write down the facts. You strip away assumptions. You ask what role you played in the collapse. Not to blame, but to understand. You do not dramatize. You do not sugarcoat. You look, with eyes clean of fantasy, at your life. Wisdom is the ground floor. Without it, every future decision becomes a misstep. Second, courage. You act despite not being ready. You return the call. You show up at the appointment. You have the hard conversation. You walk into the room where you are still ashamed. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is movement in the presence of fear. The Stoic does not wait to feel ready. He acts according to what must be done. And this action, repeated, becomes momentum. Third, justice. You choose not to become the thing that hurt you. You refuse to retaliate from hate. You do not speak untruths to damage reputations. You do not manipulate even when it would be easy. You ask not, "What do I want?" but "What is right?" Justice is the mortar of character. And when your identity is cracked, justice is what seals it with dignity. Fourth, temperance. You restrain the urge to escape. You resist the spiral of self-pity. You limit indulgence. You wake at the same hour. You eat what sustains. You limit your speech to what helps. You sleep when the day is done. Temperance is your form when your feelings are a flood. It is the body's echo of the soul's decision to remain whole. These four, applied daily, are not burdens. They are the resurrection of order. You do not need to understand everything yet. You only need to move through the fire without dropping your virtues. Daily return to form, structure. Over emotion, after the storm, you may feel as if your motivation has died. You don't want to get up. You don't want to eat. You don't want to speak. But Stoicism never relied on motivation. It relied on form. So you rise, not because you feel strong, but because rising is what a rational man does. You make the bed, you shower, you dress with care. You breathe before speaking. You go for a walk, not because you want to, but because it's what a healthy mind in pain needs to do. This return to form is your shield. It is not performance. It is not denial. It is the quiet ritual of one who says, "I will not let this grief turn me into a ghost." Even in sorrow, the Stoic remains sharpened, because order in small things protects the mind from collapsing under big things. Silencing the inner tyrant tragedy awakens not only pain, but also judgment. And perhaps the harshest voice you will hear is not from others, but from within. You should have known. You were weak. You failed them. You deserved this. You'll never recover. These are not facts. These are weapons. And the Stoic recognizes them as such. He asks, "Whose voice is this? What proof do these words have? What would I say to another man who spoke this way to himself?" Then he answers with truth. The truth is never self-flattering, but neither is it self-crucifying. The truth says you are responsible for what comes next, not for what cannot be changed. The truth says you still possess reason. The truth says you may have failed, but you are not a failure unless you now refuse to rise. And from that sober, balanced truth, you regain self-trust, one breath at a time, choosing not to be broken by what broke you. At some point, you will face the temptation to wear your suffering like an identity, to believe that because you've been through hell, you now carry its mark forever. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. You are not the events that struck you. You are the response you now build. You are the action that follows the despair. You are the silence that holds back the scream. You are the hand that helps another, even while your own soul still aches. This is not about pride. This is about dignity. To suffer without collapsing into resentment is the rarest kind of power, and it is available to any man, if he is willing to treat his wounds as sacred trials, not permanent curses. You are not here to be untouched by life. You are here to be transformed by it, and to stand tall again, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by proving it didn't define you. There is a misconception about endurance, that it is passive, that to endure is to sit still, waiting for time to heal. But the Stoic knows that endurance is work. It is active, deliberate. It is a spiritual labor that refines the man as it wears him down. When life applies pressure, most seek relief. They reach for distraction, pleasure, or numbness. But the Stoic remains, not because he enjoys pain, but because he knows the furnace is where the dross is burned off. Every moment of strain, if faced with awareness, carves out falsehood. And what remains is only what's essential. In your darkest moments, you are given the rarest gift, the ability to rebuild your soul from necessity, not comfort. Becoming the man the crisis required you were not ready. No one ever is, but readiness is not the requirement for strength. Willingness is, and so the Stoic, when struck by hardship, does not waste energy resenting the event. He accepts that the hardship has arrived and turns inward to ask, who must I now become in order to face this rightly? Not with drama, not with masochism, but with seriousness. There is something powerful about this quiet pivot, from victim to participant in one's own shaping. The pain no longer feels like punishment. It becomes a set of instructions. If your body has failed, you cultivate patience and discipline. If your heart has been betrayed, you learn boundaries and discernment. If your future has collapsed, you learn to hold tightly to principle and loosely to plans. You become adaptable without compromise. Because character is not measured by what you feel. It is measured by what you choose despite those feelings. Pain, when not resisted, becomes instruction. Epictetus was beaten as a slave. His leg was broken. He limped for the rest of his life. And yet he wrote not with bitterness, but with a kind of fierce serenity. Why? Because he understood that pain, when met cleanly, becomes instruction. Resisted pain becomes suffering. But examined pain, fully felt, deeply understood, allowed to burn away illusions, becomes your masterclass in what matters. You start to recognize what you thought was love was actually possession. What you thought was safety was actually stagnation. What you thought was power was actually applause. Pain cuts through the fog, and while it wounds, it also clears space for clarity, for depth, for reorientation. So you stop asking, why did this happen to me? And you start asking, what is this trying to teach me that comfort never could? Ritual as anchor. During prolonged suffering. In short bursts, we can survive anything, but prolonged hardship, weeks of grief, months of illness, years of rebuilding. This is where most men unravel. Not because of the event, but because of the erosion of self. And this is where Stoicism offers a different kind of tool. Not dramatic transformation, but ritual. The disciplined man understands that when the soul is fraying, you must create form around the formlessness. You wake at the same hour. You stretch. You journal. You read the same meditations. You drink your coffee with 2 steady hands. You speak less. You waste nothing. And even if nothing improves externally, you remain intact internally. Ritual becomes your shield, not as superstition, but as a reminder that you are still choosing. When the world has taken your peace, your hope, your certainty, ritual reminds you. It has not yet taken your decision. And as long as you can still choose, you are not defeated. Strength without bitterness. There's a kind of strength that makes others feel small. That's not Stoic strength. That's compensation. The Stoic's strength is quiet, almost invisible. But it radiates. It does not shame others. It steadies them. Because it was forged not in comparison, but in alignment with nature and virtue. You can feel it in his posture. You can hear it in the way he says, "I don't know," without fear. You can see it in how he listens without judgment and speaks without needing to impress. He has suffered, but he does not brag about it. He has endured, but he does not weaponize it. He is whole, not because life spared him, but because he refused to let life ruin him. And this kind of strength, the kind built without applause, without revenge, without needing to win every argument, this is the kind of strength that lasts, because it is not built on pride, it is built on truth. Long-suffering is the greatest teacher of peace. Eventually, the hardship becomes part of you, not as a scar to hide, but as a form of witness. You carry it with less sting, more wisdom. You speak less often about what happened, but when you do, it carries weight, and you no longer feel the need to prove anything. You've already proved the most important thing, that you can suffer and still remain a man of character, that you can lose and still refuse bitterness, that you can be hurt and still protect others from the same fate, that you can endure and not emerge cynical but clear. This is what the Stoics meant by strength, not a shield from life, but a soul that no longer needs one, because what is within has become stronger than anything without. Now, some exciting news. Our channel now offers a members club. By joining it, you'll unlock exclusive benefits, deeper content dives, and personal insights. Join us on this journey, and let's build a meaningful life together. And I also humbly ask you to leave a comment, as it helps my channel immensely. If you do not know what to comment, just write better every day so I know you reached this far. And don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Also, I've linked some books on Stoicism that helped me become the man I am today, and will also help you achieve a Stoic mindset. If surviving hardship is the first form of strength, and enduring it with dignity the second, then there remains a third, more difficult, more subtle, and more sacred. It is the movement from inward resilience to outward responsibility. The moment you realize that what broke you may also equip you to keep others from breaking. The Stoic understands this intuitively. Pain is not for hoarding, it is for refining, and once refined, it becomes something extraordinary. Service. You are no longer just someone who suffered. You are someone who knows how to carry suffering without making others pay for it. This is the beginning of Stoic strength at its highest form, not as armor, but as architecture. Becoming a shelter, not a shadow. Too many men take their trauma and become walls, impenetrable, cold, dismissive. They speak little, they trust less. They hide behind distance and call it wisdom. But the Stoic man, refined by hardship, does not become a wall. He becomes shelter. Not by pretending to have all the answers, but by showing what composure looks like after catastrophe. He knows how to sit with someone in silence without needing to fix them. He knows how to speak plainly without turning pain into a performance. He knows how to say, "You will survive this," not from optimism, but from embodied proof. His presence becomes medicine, not because he heals, but because he reminds others that healing is possible. And in that, he fulfills the truest Stoic ideal, to be useful to mankind. How to use your pain without broadcasting. Modern culture teaches us to monetize our suffering, to turn pain into content, to brand our wounds, to build identity around tragedy. The Stoic refuses this. He understands that the most powerful healing happens in silence. He does not deny what happened. He simply stops needing others to know it in order to validate his strength. He speaks of hardship when it helps someone else, not when it feeds his own ego. And when he tells the story, he strips it of embellishment. He says, "This is what happened. This is how I failed. This is what I did next. And this is what I continue to do." There is no drama in his tone. There is no need for pity. There is only clarity. And that clarity becomes a blueprint for others. Not how to avoid pain, but how to carry it cleanly. True strength is gentle when it can be cruel. After great suffering, some men grow sharp. They see the world as hostile. They trust no one. They use their pain as license to punish. But the Stoic understands that true strength is gentle. He has nothing to prove. He has seen enough of pain to recognize it in others, even the ones who are lashing out. He knows that most cruelty is just unprocessed agony wearing a mask of control. So, when he could mock, he listens. When he could attack, he asks questions. When he could dominate, he chooses silence. Not because he is afraid, but because he knows what it's like to bleed unseen, and he refuses to cause that in another. This gentleness is not weakness. It is discipline refined by fire. It is a man who has seen what pain can do, and chooses to break the cycle. Living as an embodied philosophy, at a certain point, you no longer speak of Stoicism in words. You live it, in the way you enter a room, in the way you let someone else finish their sentence, in the way you make time for what's necessary, even when it's inconvenient. You do not quote Marcus Aurelius at dinner parties. You hold your tongue when it would be easier to gloat. You say, "I was wrong," before someone else has to point it out. Your strength is no longer something you tap into. It is something you are. Not because life got easier, but because you refused to become worse while life became harder. You lead, not by strategy, but by consistency. You parent, not by control, but by presence. You love, not by needing, but by serving. And when others ask you how you stayed so calm, you don't offer techniques. You just say, "I decided to remain in alignment even when everything else fell apart." Mastering the return. Teaching without teaching. There is one final form of strength, the rarest of all. It is the strength to teach without preaching, to walk through life as an open question. What does it look like to remain intact when life is unfair? And to let your actions answer it without explanation. The Stoic man does not beg to be understood. He simply remains ordered in disordered environments. And that order, visible in posture, speech, rhythm, presence, becomes contagious. People mirror it. They feel safer. They begin to believe that maybe, just maybe, there is a way to remain clean in a dirty world. You are not a hero. You are not a savior. You are simply what happens when a man lets pain refine him instead of deform him. And in that, you become what the world so desperately needs. Not more noise, not more control, not more bravado, but a still point in the storm. You may never be the same again. And that's not a tragedy, because the goal of Stoicism was never to help you return to who you were before the hardship. The goal was to help you become the man you were always meant to be, but couldn't access until everything else was stripped away. What remains now is stronger not because it is immune, but because it is aware. The man who has faced grief, betrayal, illness, and failure, and chosen discipline, dignity, and clarity in response, has no need to shout his strength. He becomes a kind of living architecture, quiet, solid, and unshakable. The end is a return to the beginning with eyes open. You return to the same streets, the same work, the same meals, but everything has changed, because you now see what you couldn't before, that most people live asleep, rushing, reacting, justifying, avoiding, but you have walked through fire and remained intact. So you don't need to rush anymore. You don't need to prove. You don't need to grip everything out of fear that it might disappear. You understand something simple, something the ancients tried to whisper through the centuries. All is borrowed. Nothing is promised. But what you bring to each moment, no force can take that away. That is where your strength lives now, not in what happens, but in how you show up, moment by moment, without needing the moment to go your way. The Stoics' final decision, to remain aligned. When the world returns to its noise, when the phones ring again, when deadlines return, when the memory of pain starts to dull, there will be temptation. Temptation to abandon what you learned, to go back to haste, to rush, to shallow comfort, to pleasing the crowd. But the Stoic knows this is the real test, not how you behaved at the bottom, but how you carry yourself on the return. So he recommits, not to intensity, but to consistency. He chooses to remain aligned, to revisit the meditations, to practice the disciplines, to speak with care, to live each hour as if it were his last, not in panic, but in form, because now he knows what kept him strong was not strength, it was integrity. Strength is what remains. After the shattering, you may look in the mirror and see the cracks, aging you didn't expect, a heaviness in your eyes, a posture that holds old weight. That's fine. The Stoic does not seek to erase the evidence of suffering. He wears it, like the Japanese art of Kintsugi, where shattered pottery is repaired with gold. So too does the Stoic let his life remain visibly rebuilt. Because the point was never to look untouched. The point was to become unshakable, precisely because you have been touched by everything and remained in command of yourself. You know now that strength is not reactive, it is proactive. It is not armor to keep the world out. It is inner form that holds you together when the world collapses. Your presence is now the medicine. You will meet people now, friends, loved ones, strangers, who are exactly where you once were, staring at a phone with news that broke their world, sitting in a room, wondering how they'll ever feel steady again, holding grief that feels like it will never let go. And you will not need to fix them. You will not need to explain. You will not even need to speak much, because your presence, if it is ordered, kind, and clean, will say everything. They will see in you not perfection, but proof. Proof that a man can walk through hell and come out clear-eyed, that a soul can break and still become beautiful, that you do not need to become bitter to become strong. That pain is not an ending, but a refinement. You will be the thing they didn't know they needed to see. A man who has suffered deeply and still lives well. The final meditation. You return to your breath. You return to the morning ritual. You return to the page where you write, "I do not know what today will bring. I do not control what will happen, but I do control the kind of man I will be." And that is enough. That is your creed now. Not the avoidance of pain, not the denial of emotion, but the daily choice to live with form, restraint, presence, and moral clarity. And should life strike again, and it will, you do not ask, "Why me?" You ask, "How will I respond?" Because you know. In that response, your character is revealed, and in that character, your freedom is secured. Not because the world will spare you, but because you no longer need it to. You are the storm's equal now, not because you roared louder, but because you stood still while everything else swayed. That is Stoicism. That is strength. That is how a man endures the hardest chapters and become someone others can follow through them. Now, if any part of this message has been helpful to you, leave us your like and comment, helping the algorithm recommend it to someone who needs it at this time. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new videos. And if you look through the videos we've already uploaded, you're sure to find something to take with you. Have a good day.